Okay, it's 9:20, so we should get started. Everyone have a good break? Who's ready to graduate, for those of you who are seniors? So you might as well just end with a bang, right? With the greatest class of all time, right? This one. Okay, so this is COSC480, Interaction Testing, Theory and Practice. So you're actually kind of lucky because this is the second time that this class has ever been taught in any university. So, and the really great thing is that right now is the best time to be entering into this field because there's a new wave of new types of research being built with this in this field. So hopefully we will be tackling a lot of interesting research problems, and if you want to continue, you may be able to have some publications under your belt, which I think is always a good thing. I always think it's a great idea for undergraduates to have at least some experience in research. How many of you have no experience in research whatsoever? Okay, so a few of you. So you might as well have some experience. So I'm going to talk about what this field is all about later, but here's a little blob about what the class will be all about. So how many of you are not on Slack yet? Okay, so some of you. So if you haven't gotten the invite link, it's right here. This bit.ly link right here. It's on the course syllabus if you haven't picked it up. So everything is going to happen on Slack. We're not going to use Moodle, okay? Because frankly, it's not as easy to use as I want it to be. So I want it to be more of a discussion focus, and Slack is a good tool for that. Okay. Oh yeah. So things about me. So here's my email. So if you don't contact me on Slack, email is the best way to contact me. My office hours are in 3:03. I actually don't have the keys to my office yet. So, and I don't know if I'm going to get them by Monday. So I'm not sure if I'm going to hold office hours in my office on Monday, but I will hold them probably outside my office. So it's over here and probably just right outside my office. Lectures are here. On Wednesdays, I've scheduled an hour right after class for solving problems. So this is completely optional. It is not affected in your grade whatsoever. It won't help you. It won't hurt you. It won't do anything. But if you're interested in maybe getting some help on some of the things you'll be doing in your project, or you want to pursue something else in terms of research, this would be a great way to do it because a bunch of heads are much better than one head. Okay, so it's always a good idea to actually talk things out for research purposes than just working by yourself. Okay, any questions on me or the administrative stuff? Okay, so assessment type things. There are no tests in this class of any kind. Woo! Okay, I hope that's a good thing, but so this will be kind of a different class than you may be used to. So what we're going to do is have most of the focus being on a semester-long project. So what you'll be doing in around late February, mid-March, you'll start trying to formulate a research question or some types of problems that you want to solve or something along those lines. And then you'll be researching that and then writing code and then trying to come up with good solutions for the rest of the semester. And then at the end, you'll present what you have accomplished and then write a report based off of that. So the assessment broken down is 5 homeworks, which are going to be right at the beginning of the semester. And in fact, the first homework is probably going to come out to you on Friday. So we should get a move on that. Throughout the semester, so the interesting thing about this class is that this is not set in stone. So we as a class can decide what do we want to actually be, what we should do during class, whether you want to have this be a completely a lecture-based class or a lecture / we read some papers and discuss them type class. So I currently have it based off of the latter one, where we have lectures for a few weeks, and then for the weeks after that, we'll have either 1 or 2 classes for lecture, and then the rest of the classes in that week will be discussing a paper. And then for that, what each of you will either be working individually or in pairs, and what you'll do is you'll be assigned or choose a paper, and then you'll come up to here to the front on that particular day and then present or basically summarize and discuss the research paper. And everyone will have read it, and those 1 or 2 people will lead the discussion, so to speak, on that paper. So that's the paper presentation and discussion part. The proposal for the project is you just write a simple 1-page proposal and then about what you want to do. And then we can discuss, you and I, about whether you want to scale it back or scale it up, depending on what you want to do, or what seems feasible. There's, of course, a progress report midway through, so like at the end of March or early April, somewhere around those lines, you'll submit a little progress report. You'll have a presentation in the last 2 weeks of the semester, and at the final exam time, when it normally would be, you just submit the project via email. And I have all the due dates at the bottom of the syllabus. Any questions on assessment type things? Yeah.
Would the project be individual effort?
Good question. So looking at how many students there are in the class, and I'm happy with how many students there are, some students will have to be in groups of 2. So you can work individually or in groups of 2, but there have to be some groups of 2. So what I want to do is, in the last 2 weeks of class, have presentations, and each presentation be a third of the class. So if you calculate that, that's 18 presentations, but there are 22 of you. So either if you decide to drop, then that might help, but I hope no one drops. This is a really interesting class, and I hope you stick around with it. But if you all stick around, then you'll have to work in groups of 2, some of you. But it's basically the choice of yours for what you want to do there. Any other questions on assessment? Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention. I'm recording these lectures, the screen here, and I'll post them on YouTube. So if you miss a class or you don't understand what we do in one particular class, you can always revisit it. Okay, yeah. So this is just basically a blob about like, how do you approach reading papers? So it's not like you just go straight through and then you completely understand everything. So how many of you have taken 304 before? So most of you. So when you like read a section from the book on theory of computation, do you immediately understand it? Or do you have to read it like 10 times? Notice that one of the words in the title called theory. So there is going to be theory in this class. There is going to be some mathematics in here. Okay. So just understand that if you read something in a paper and you don't immediately understand it, that's completely okay. So what I want you to do is not to understand every single detail, but rather just to understand the overall contribution that the paper brings. So here are some basic questions you want to consider, like what does the paper do? What are some implications? What are the things that they should have done better? What are the things that they actually did well? And all those types of things. And I have some miscellaneous stuff here, like if you miss a class, like let me know, talk to an administrative dean for accommodation type things. Disabilities, if you have any disability accommodation that you need, please let me know as soon as possible. So the basic standard stuff. Counseling, writing and speaking, all that stuff. So the one section I really don't want to talk very much about, I mean, you're still here, so you probably aren't going to fall into this trap, but every semester I have some students who have academic integrity type issues. So oh, I need to update these. There's no midterm or final. I need to update this. So everything if you're working in pairs, you can obviously share everything within your pair, but not citing a source that you use is academic integrity, a violation of it. So if you just copy something from online or something like that, or copy a paragraph for your final report, that's an academic integrity violation, and there will be penalties with it. So I hope no one falls into that trap. And here are just some rules about like citing. Always cite your sources. Try to be a good CS student. There's no penalty for citing things. Okay, so any questions on academic integrity? Okay, here's a tentative schedule. So, of course, we didn't meet Monday because my flight was delayed. So we're here on this Wednesday, and this is what I plan to do or I want to accomplish throughout the semester. So for the first 3 weeks, we're just going to have pure lecture. And no matter what we do, we're going to stick to that. But the weeks after that, we could either have 2 days of lecture in one paper or one lecture and 2 papers, or we can just abandon papers entirely and then I can assign more homeworks. So we don't have to decide right now. We can discuss this on Slack if you want to, but this is what I plan to do unless there's consensus otherwise. Oh, I need to remove, there's no final exam. I need to fix my syllabus first. Okay. Homework, here are tentative homework due dates. So it's basically the first 5 weeks of class. Nothing too hard there. And then some project due dates. So the one-page proposal will be early March. Progress report will be end of March. Final paper will be due in early May. Okay. Any questions about anything syllabus related?
So should we work in pairs for both paper presentation as well?
Yeah, so let's see. So there are 15, I currently have 15 papers, so quite a few of you are going to have to work in pairs. Yeah, and I'm totally fine with that. And I could assign 2 papers or 2 short papers for when you have a pair, which I think would make more sense. But again, we can decide what we want to do as a class. So it's not like an early in the curriculum type class where things are rigid and things cannot change. Like tests are on this day, homeworks are on this day. This is a more flexible class. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's get into intro stuff. Okay. Oh, actually, I don't need a pen because I got this. Okay, so what is this class about? So how many of you have ever heard of interaction testing before? Great, you get to learn something new. So this is probably the most important research area you've never heard of. Okay, you've heard of AI, you've heard of robotics, machine learning, computer vision, all those types of things. Interaction testing, I'm sure most of you or all of you have never, ever heard of. And why is that? I don't know. But we're going to explore this research area throughout this class. So what is it? So interaction testing is based on the idea that we have these really complex systems and we want to understand how they work. Okay? So how many of you have ever had this awful experience of you're playing on your phone and you're playing some type of game, but in the background you're listening to music with your headphones or something, and then you're also downloading an app also in the background. And then what happens is that the game or at least one of the services just crashes. So you're playing your game and you're doing stuff in the background, but it just crashes at just some random point. How many of you have ever had that experience? If you haven't, you need to use your phone more. Okay, so why is that the case? The thing is, if you just play your game by itself and don't do anything in the background, it never crashes. Or if you just download an app in the background and nothing else, it doesn't crash. So it seems interesting that when you do multiple things at the same time, then things just fall apart. So interaction testing is about testing all of these components that occur simultaneously within a system and to test interactions of multiple components at the same time. So if we want to test whether our phone actually works, we need to test, say, that interaction of those three components. So we want to be able to test whether those three things happening at the same time really function together. And if they don't, then we want some testing strategy to tell us, hey, there is a fault in the system. Something went wrong right here. And then maybe tell us, okay, here are the three problematic components, and as well as what you were doing in each of them. So the idea of the entire class is to look at the testing strategies from a combinatorial point of view. And what do I mean by combinatorial? I mean a theoretical model, a formal model for what interaction testing is, and then try to understand the behavior of those objects that we study. So in 304, you study DFAs, CFGs, Turing machines, and all that stuff. Those are formal models for computation. We're going to look at formal models for interaction testing. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. So yeah, so we're going to formulate the problems in a formal way. We're going to give the formal model, but we'll understand that there are some inherent limitations. So maybe we don't want to test every single interaction of the system. Maybe there are some interactions we don't ever want to test. So an example would be if we have sodium and water, what happens if we put sodium and water together? Or is it chloride and water? I forget which one. Right. It goes boom. Right? So maybe we don't want to test multiple things at this, multiple dangerous components at the same time. Or maybe we want to test multiple an interaction that occurs multiple times. So maybe for that game music and app download example, maybe it occurs once every 5 times. The crashing occurs once every 5 times and not every single time. So maybe we want to test some things multiple times instead of just once. And yeah, so those are the things that could happen, but we're going to present the formal model first and then make adjustments as we need to along the way. But the key thing that we're going to focus on pretty much the entire semester is how small can we make these tests, the number of tests that we run. So let's see. So what if we had a system where we had a test 1 where we had some inputs here, here, and here. Test 2, we have some inputs here, here, here. So maybe for the game example, we could be playing Angry Birds. Anyone remember Angry Birds? Okay. So name an artist you may want to listen to. Who? Yeah, Lord? That's how you pronounce it, right? Okay. So I may look young, but I'm not. Okay. So let's see. Lord, what was the other example? Downloading an app. So what would be an app that you want to download? Facebook. Okay. These are just examples. And the second test might be, well, maybe that it occurs with some games and not other games. So maybe we want to test, we have another FB, Flappy Bird. A big interest in bird games, right? So anyone remember Flappy Bird? That guy made $50,000 a day with that game on ad revenue alone. So it is very interesting, the amount of money you can make here. What's another artist? Kanye, okay. Okay, and then what's another app you want to download? It could be the same one. Twitter. It could be completely different. It could be the same. So these may be some tests that we want to run, and maybe we want maybe at the end of our testing strategy, whatever that is, we have 1,000 tests. And then some inputs for those. I don't care what they are. Let's just say that there are 1,000 tests. And what we want to guarantee about our testing strategy is that all possible interactions, at least in the formal model, all possible things that could happen, we want to be able to have them appear in our test suite. So let's just look at this, for example. So let's just say that we have the number of apps that we could be, oh no, not apps. Number of games that we could be playing is 50. The number of artists, let's just say, is 2. We just love Lord and Kanye and no one else. And the number of apps that we could be downloading is 10. So, and let's just say that those are the only 3 components that we're going to consider. So what are the number of combinations of game with artist and app put together? I chose those numbers for a reason. Well, I have 50 choices for each of the games. Independently, I have 2 choices for artists, and then independently, I have 10 choices for the artists. So how many choices do I have in total? It's not 62. How many? 1,000. That's why I chose those numbers. So if we just multiply all of those together, we have 1,000 possible combinations. Okay? And if my handwriting is atrocious, please let me know. Okay, so we have 1,000 possible combinations that could appear. So what if it was instead 5,000 games, and actually I'm going to make those a different color. Ooh, different colors. And then 200 artists, and then 1,000 different apps. I don't want you to calculate that, but what happened to the number of possibilities here? It skyrocketed, right? I think it's 1 billion or something. It's somewhere around there. But the point is that if we look at this from an exhaustive point of view, if we just enumerate every possible test that we want to consider, in general, this could be a really bad thing. But is 1 billion tests really a bad thing? So how many of you have ever heard of the National Institute of Standards and Technology? Okay, so another organization you've never heard of, but is very, very important. So one of the leaders there said one time that he was testing this, the system that they have for key input presses. And they want to actually validate whether certain sequences of presses actually do the right thing. And they said that they can run 1 billion tests an hour. Okay, so would 1 billion tests in that scenario be prohibitive? Probably not. It just runs at an hour, and then we're all good. Even if it was like 20 billion, it would still run in a day. So that's not really that big of a concern. Now compare that to some work that the Navy has done in the last few years. And there are some tests that they have wanted to run that each individual test took 12 hours and cost $40,000 each test. So would 1 billion tests in that scenario be a bad thing? Very. Okay? So what we want to do, obviously, is to minimize the number of tests if possible, subject to the criterion that we still maintain all possible combinations of a certain number of interactions that it could occur. Well, let's just see. Well, could it be that in our testing strategy of these 3 components right here, that if we just test 2 of them and ignore the third one, just testing the 2, that every possible way of choosing 2 components, it'll always work? Could that be possible? That 2 components always work, but then when I add the third one, it might not? Could that be possible? It could be. So we need to have some kind of trade-off in terms of how big of interactions we want to test versus the number of components that we have. So in this case, we have 3. Maybe we need all 3-way combinations, or maybe we can suffice with 2. Okay, so that's the type of thing that we're going to be considering: minimizing the number of tests, subject to covering all possible combinations within our test suite. Any questions on that? The general idea, at least. Okay, so in order to actually make these test suites, we need to consider various algorithms in order to actually make them. So one strategy you might try is, I have absolutely no idea what to do. Let's just make the test suite completely randomly. I'm not going to be smart about this. I'm just going to make it randomly. And what we'll look at is how well in practice does that work. And it turns out pretty bad. So in some senses actually good, and in some other senses actually pretty bad. And what do I mean by that? If we look at a very large number of components, like as the number of components goes to infinity, it actually performs very well. But if we look at a number of components that is close to practical use, then it's actually pretty bad. So we want to be able to see what is the trade-off between using this very simple strategy versus the fact that it doesn't give you very good test suites in terms of the number of tests. So like in our example, if I revert back to the original one here, where we had 1,000 combinations, it might be that the random method will tell you that you can definitely do it in 10,000 tests versus 1,000, which is optimal. Because if we look at all possible combinations and we have 3 components and we want to consider interactions of 3 components, then we can't possibly do better than 1,000 because every possible combination appears exactly once. So we want to be able to understand how far random is from optimal and some trade-offs based off of that. So we'll look at random testing and see how well does it do. And then we'll look at some other methods that build the test suite one at a time. So the random method I described says, let's just make the entire array at once. But another method might be, or is, let's just make one test at a time. So instead of making all 1,000 tests, we'll just make one test at a time. And then at each point, let's evaluate our progress. How well are we doing? And then adjust our strategy as we need to. So that turns out to do a lot better than just the pure random approach, but there's a lot more computation involved. Okay, then we'll look at something called anti-random, and you may be confused. Anti-random, what does that mean? So anti-random is basically the idea of, instead of making these tests just completely randomly one at a time, let's make a test that's as far as possible from all of the other ones that we have done. In other words, we don't want to repeat work that we've already done. So, for example, if we did Angry Birds, Lord, and Facebook, we don't want the second test to be Angry Birds, Lord, and Facebook again. We want the test to be as far as possible from the one before, and we can actually see that that is true with these 2 tests because there's nothing in common between the 2 tests, right? So Angry Birds became Flappy Bird, Lord became Kanye, and Facebook became Twitter. So we'll look at anti-random type methods. Then we'll look at greedy methods. How many of you have taken 302 algorithms? What have you learned about greedy algorithms?
Not great.
What's that?
Not always great.
Yeah, and in fact, there's some cardinal rule that some professors say that greedy methods work optimally on a vanishingly small set of problems. Only on a very specific set of problems does greedy actually work. And the same is actually true and false in this scenario. So greedy is actually good in some cases and not others, and we'll see what the trade-off is there. And you may be thinking, okay, well, these three methods, Ryan, you're telling me are terrible in some cases. And that's actually right. But there's this fourth method right here called post-optimization, which is probably the coolest title of any algorithm ever, which is basically the idea that we start off with a terrible solution and then eliminate redundancy within our solution. So let's just say for like, I don't have much room here. Let's just say for our 1001th test, we have Angry Birds, just as an example again, Lord and Facebook again. Is there redundancy within our testing strategy here? Yeah, how can you tell? Yeah, it's literally the same test. Test 1 and test 1001 are literally the same. So what could we do then? Well, I can just say, well, let's strike out that test. I'm not going to use that test anymore. So we're eliminating redundancy within our testing strategy. So that's what post-optimization is all about, which is we start off with a terrible set of tests, and then we eliminate redundancy as we need to. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. Any questions on these basic approaches? Okay, so another method or set of methods is called meta-heuristic search. How many of you have ever heard of meta-heuristics before? So the basic idea is let's, instead of doing like a random-based idea, let's make a better estimate of how well we're doing along the way. So it's still a random-based method, but let's actually take some note of how well we're doing along the way. So how many of you have ever heard of hill climbing? For those of you who haven't, let me give you the basic idea. So let's just say that we have a landscape that looks like this, and it's flat everywhere else other than these two peaks. And let's say that you're standing right here. And your goal is to get to the highest point of the entire landscape. And the only thing that you have available is a little flashlight, and it's completely dark around you. So it's completely dark, but you have a little flashlight so you can see the area right around you and nowhere else. So what would you do? If you can't see anything, but you can see immediately right around you, what would you do?
Maybe just walk towards the tire.
Right, yeah. How many of you heard of gradient ascent or descent in machine learning? So the basic idea is for gradient descent, you basically just go down the slope of steepest descent. And at some point, you must reach the bottom of some type of valley there. So what you do here is we make an increment. I should make that a little clearer, maybe with a different color. So we make incremental steps in the direction of steepest descent until we get to a point where every single move that we make is a worse solution, on the hill is lower than where we are. So what does that tell us about this particular example right here? Did we reach the very top of the entire landscape? No, we didn't. Because there's this peak over here. Oops. Yeah, there's this peak over here. Okay, I must be clicking that button. I'll do it that way. So there's this peak over here that is higher than the highest point we can reach via hill climbing. So hill climbing is actually a very good idea, but because it's very computationally fast, but it doesn't lead to the optimal solution all the time. But suppose instead that we know that there's exactly one peak in the entire distribution, in the entire landscape. Does hill climbing always work? Yes. It always works. Because if there's only one peak in the entire landscape, then by going up the slope, we must reach the peak at some point, and there's no point higher because there's only one peak. Okay? So in some domains, hill climbing is great, and sometimes it isn't. So you may be thinking, okay, what if we want to do that type of strategy, but there are two hills like before? How do we get to the higher peak? Anyone have an idea? Yeah.
Do you count your increments?
What's that?
Do you count your increments and you are?
What do you mean by counting increments?
In order to get to the first peak, it takes a certain number of increments, and then as you go down, you like go to the bottom of the in-between valve, and then when you go back up, it's like more increments.
Yeah, so that seems reasonable, but the problem is that I still only see the area immediately around me, and I don't know anywhere else in the landscape. So any other ideas? Yeah.
Starting from multiple positions?
Starting from multiple positions, but and that actually is an example of meta-heuristic search. So yeah, that is something called a genetic algorithm. Although it's not exactly that, but that's an example of where you basically just choose a bunch of random points in the entire distribution. And in genetic algorithms, what you do is you basically just figure out, okay, what is the best 4 points that I've ever chosen? So basically what genetic algorithms will do in this case is it'll just make a sweep across the entire landscape and just say, I'm going to only keep the points that are above the line. And then what genetic algorithms will do is we'll work with these 4 points and combine them in various ways to get another population of points that is better than the original set that we picked. And then we repeat over and over and over again. So that's what genetic algorithms would do. But let's just assume for the moment, for sake of discussion, that we have exactly 1 point. What could we do?
We can add noise to the step size.
Yeah, so that is something called, although it's not exactly this either, but it's something called simulated annealing. And we'll learn all about these algorithms in the semester. So how many of you have ever heard of annealing? Great, you get to learn a whole bunch of awesome things today. So suppose that we have some kind of sculpture of metal that we want to make. So I have a long sheet of metal right here, and I want to bend it to my will to get a particular shape. What would you do? Or glass or whatever. What would you do? What you would do is you would heat it up to a very high temperature and then start hitting it with a hammer or some kind of instrument to start bending it into a shape that's vaguely like the thing that you want. But then as the temperature goes down to become more room temperature, what happens to the metal if I start to hit it? It becomes less and less likely to bend. So as I make these rough adjustments when the temperature is hot, as it cools down and I still hit it with a hammer, the adjustments are going to be more fine. And then I can make finer and finer adjustments as we need to. So the basic idea for simulated annealing in this context is let's basically just jump randomly all over the map, and as the temperature goes down, I'm going to make smaller and smaller jumps. And then what has been proven is simulated annealing, if you run it long enough, will achieve the optimal answer. Will reach the top of the peak. So all of these algorithms are taking advantage of how well we're doing to adjust the algorithm's performance along the way. Any questions on meta-heuristics? Okay. And then, of course, what would it be if we don't have math? Okay. So how many of you have ever heard of or taken combinatorics? Okay, so only a few of you. So Combinatorial methods is just a really scary word for something that is very easy to understand. So combinatorial methods mean that we're going to look at these tests, these set of tests, as just a 2D array. So how many of you are not familiar with 2D arrays? I hope you all are. So if you know what a 2D array is, you're all good. And what combinatorial methods do is basically, I have a test suite here and a test suite here, and I cut and paste them together. So like, for example, if I have a test suite on 3 components here and another one on 3 components, and I glue them together, I have at least the start of a test suite of 6 components. It's literally just cutting and pasting things together. So it's actually really scary looking, but it's actually very intuitive once we start getting into this. Yeah, so the great thing about these methods is that in some cases, they really do prove to be the optimal, or at least the best known values, or for the sizes of our tests. And but the bad thing is that they only work for certain parameters sometimes. So like for primes, they only work for the prime numbers and not for any of the other ones, for the composite numbers. And then we'll look at some combinatorial methods and how to improve them and all that stuff. So for references, here are some references. You don't have to look at them. I'm not requiring you to, and they won't be papers to read in the class because they're just way too long. But if you want to actually look at some things, if you want to get some more background on these, the first one right here by Grindal et al. Is basically a practitioner's point of view. So it has very little theory whatsoever, but looks at things from a more practical point of view, from an actual software tester point of view. Yeah, so then the second one is kind of in the middle, where it focuses on the practical and the theory all at the same time. And it doesn't go too far into either one, so that if you're in one camp, you can understand what the other camp is like. And then the third one by my advisor talks about all of the mathy type things. So if you are a math or theory type person, this would be the one for you. And if you want to see some examples, this link is here. And all of the lectures that I have that I'm going to be doing here, they're already uploaded to Slack, so feel free to look at those again. Any questions on combinatorics or references? Okay, so what are some objectives? What I want you to be able to at least get a grasp on throughout the semester is what are the techniques people use to actually construct these test suites? As well as what is actually happening right now. What are people actually researching, that sort of thing. Yeah, so let's see. So conducting research, you need to be able to conduct some type of research, like the paper presentation will be somewhat of a literature review, so you try to understand what people have done, try to read actual research papers, and then conduct your own research, which is to pursue something for your project. Yeah, so there are lots of research questions, so there's no shortage of them. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities here, and then maybe we'll get some publishable results, which is always nice. Any questions about any of this? Okay, so I'm going to start with the next set of slides, and then we'll quit at 10:10. Okay, so let's talk about why would you ever consider these types of objects. So we kind of highlighted it earlier, but let's talk about an actual example. So how many of you have sorted things before? That was a trick question. Everyone has sorted things before. So in order to do sorts properly, we want to make sure that the software works, of course. So there's a command in Unix to sort things. And there are lots of different parameters you can provide. So if you look at the man page, there are things like sort in reverse order, or ignore capitalization, or include capitalization, all that type of thing. So there are, in fact, 18 flags that we can provide to the sort command that we can provide based off what we want to sort and how we want it to be sorted. So how do we check if things work properly? So by flags, what do you think I mean? So in 101, you learn about something flag. What is the word before it? It's an 8-letter word that starts with bool and ends with "een". Boolean flag, right? We make flags so that we can detect when something occurs. So there are 18 flags that we could theoretically provide to the sort command, or ignore some of them, or all that. So there are 18 flags. Well, what is the number of possibilities that we could, in principle, test to make sure our sort command works? Well, we always know what the outcome is. So what should the outcome of sort be if we provided a list of numbers, for example? So if I provide sort, so this is not actual Unix syntax, but let's just say I want to sort the list 13, 5, and 12, and 8. So what should the outcome of that be? Yeah, the things in order, right? 5, 8, 12, 13. And if I said I want to sort things in descending order, so let's just say I have sort minus D for descending. I just made that up. It's not real. 13, 5, 12, and 8. What should the outcome in that case be? It's not a trick question. Yes. You're going to have to participate in this class, okay? So 13, 12, 8, and 5. So for each of the possibilities of flags that we could provide, like descending order or whatever, we know what the outcome is supposed to look like. So what we can do is just say, for the sort command with no flags whatsoever, I expect the result to be 5, 8, 12, 13. If I provide descending and no other flags, then the result I should expect to be 13, 12, 8, 5. So what we can do is just run the sort command on the first input, and then check whether the output really is the thing that we want. If there is a difference, so maybe for the first one we got 8, 5, 12, 13, then what do we know about the sort command? It produces the wrong output, so what should we do with the sort code? Look into it. There's something wrong with the code. Because why? If it produces 8, 5, 12, 13, what do we know? Does it do the sorting right? No, it can't. It can't. So for that reason, we need to look into it further. But suppose that we tested every possible way of choosing those flags, and every single time the output matches perfectly. What can we say about the sort command? It's good, ready to ship. Okay? So you may be wondering then, what is the number of possible flags that we can provide? Well, again, what is a flag? How many choices do I have for flags? 2. So are the flags independent of each other? Yeah. So what is 2 times 2 times 2 times blah, blah, blah times 2, 18 times? Well, that is 2 to the power 18, which is 260 whatever thousand. Okay? So if I just looked at every possible choice of flags that we can provide, we have 260,000 tests to run. Now, is that really a big issue for the sort command? It might be. depending on the list that we consider. But for a list of size 4, is that really a big deal? No, because it'll take a few nanoseconds to sort this. Okay, so we could just try all combinations, but how many choices can cause a faulty interaction if one exists? So could it be, in our example, that we have an 18 size interaction that causes the sort to not work, but 17, it always works? If I just choose 17 flags and the sort always works, but if I choose 18, all 18, it doesn't work. Could that be possible? Yeah, just like before, where we just chose 2 and 3, if 2 works, 3 doesn't work. So I'm going to stop here, but we're going to make one assumption that the size of the interactions is always going to be a small number. So I'll see you on Friday.